Okay, thank you. So in the middle part of the two blocks, there's going to be some questions between us. So I can tackle that question, reframe it in a way to answer that. And well, thank you very much. Thank you for the organizers for having us here and proposing for us to be here and debate a little bit. This was, I think, a very nice idea. I'm going to start here. Because we always say this that, so now we are together and we can discuss it. And what we want, because that's why the Q&A questions is big, is that the public chips in. So that's kind of the idea, no, to talk. So I'm gonna give the other version. So okay, so this is the first part. And so what are mental representations, what they are, do we need them? So for us, the question is, it was very clear in the representationalism theory that we do need them. So we ask, do we need them? No? So we are basing our talk here. Is our work, is work of others, but it is the work we use for our work. So that's why we are saying it. So we are basing it in these three main questions that are posed in this book: the embodied mind, a famous one, 1982, the wonderful year, because I was born in that year, so I think it's a very nice coincidence. So now I told you my age, but it's okay. So what is cognition? How does cognition work? And how do we know when a cognitive system is working properly? And this is going to be important. So cognition is traditionally taken as the processing of information in the form of computational symbols, which could be representations, based on the rules of manipulation of symbols. How does it work? Through any apparatus that supports and manipulates symbols and discrete functional elements. And how do we know when it's working properly? This is important. When symbols appropriately represent some aspects of the real world, and information processing leads to a successful solution of the problem given to the system. Yeah. So in this view, we have many things that we can analyze. So we have how cognitive science and neuroscience tackles stimuli and localization versus holism, experiences and mechanisms, methodology and scope. So I'm not going to go into all of those. The important part I'm gonna put on here is the stimuli and sensations are looked as an input-output system, or a way of coding the input-output sense data, no, which is the way they treat it. And experience and mechanism are taken or as computational algorithms for that account for the neurophysiological states that mediate between stimulus and responses. No? So you have three boxes. We put it as circles, but you have three boxes. No? The stimulus, which is the material part, the sense data. Then you have the cognitive system, which produces the representations, and that's the important part. No? And then you have behavior, which includes the social behavior. No? That's the output. And you can say there are algorithms or representations, but something happens inside, right? So one question is, am I saying this right? So in this approach, the different states of the system, you have three parts. And the ecological scale is always outside of the system. No? What happens is in the individual, in the cognitive system. The stimuli to build up a model of the world is the theory of mind, and the behavior is produced by the cognitive system properly understood. And the cognitive system is the circle inside. No? So these computer approaches or tales frames the ecological and the social not as a further scale to be integrated, but as a material to model and consume in order to deliver a product. So of course it's causal, but it's only giving information to deliver that product. So we don't agree at all with all of that. With some parts, of course, yes, But the radical embodied approach is going to say something different. What it's going to say is that the stimuli and sensations has to be taken as an organism environment, that's the OE, organism environment nesting that, that contains invariants. And that puts on a structure or a gestalt and that is what we perceive. And the experience and the mechanism of perception is, you can say it as resonance or as attunement or sensory motor coupling. No? There are variants there. So the picture changes. No? So what we have is nested systems. So the organism environment is the system that we have to take into consideration. And this is important because the ontology changes. So you are not experiencing or you are not perceiving just as a state, but you have to take in consideration the whole organism environmental system. And that, of course, inside of it, in that system, many nested invariants. And all the scales are important. And this is also a good point to emphasize, because all the scales, molecular, single neurons, networks, ecology, other persons, artifacts, and whatever you are taking as the unity of analysis what that you are explaining. No? So the ecological unit, the organism environment, must feature in our explanations of the brain. So in order to explain what happens in the brain, because we are not saying the brain is not important or that we are agents without brains or that nothing happens in the brains, that's not what we're saying, is that the organism environment has to feature for explaining what happens in the brain. And regarding the outsides, because we are scratching that separation, but regarding the outsides, it's as important as regarding the insides. And you can put it, we are going to explain that in the second part, as information resonance or sensory motor coupling. I went to the other way. So in this approach or in this way of explaining it, the organism environmental scale is what drives the integration of it. So you can see it as synergies, or you can see it as a complex system or a dynamical system, but is the whole unit. I think I made it clear now. And all scales talk the same language. So it's not something that happens in the inside has a different way of explaining what happens on the outside, but you have to make this the same language to discuss the whole phenomenon. So, for example, if we want to explain why, who was it? Anna went for the beer. Mary went for the beer. No, we have first to say that in order for that to happen, she has to have understood where she is. And if she's in her house, she has many sensory motor couplings with that house. So she knows that if she's in her room, she can know that the beer is going to be in the fridge, no? Because she knows exactly how to get there spatiotemporally. So she has previous sensory motor couplings with that particular surrounding that gives her the information that she's there and she's going to be able to go to the fridge and get the beer. That doesn't happen as a deliberation or as a, she doesn't put it in phrases. It's something that happens corporally, bodily, because she's in her house. She knows that she can do that. And then she can go to the fridge. Then maybe there are no beers. And then she's going to have a disappointment. Or she's going to open it and then she's going to grab it. But in order to do that, she has had to have many sensory motor coupling patterns that allow her to do that. No, it's not that happens just because it has a history, a trajectory, a sensory motor pattern trajectory that delivers her that. And then when she grabs it and she pulls it, she has the affordance, I'm going to talk about it in a while, to grab it and do it. And maybe there's milk because someone played her a very bad joke. No? So maybe there's milk in it. And then she's going to be disgusted. No? She didn't need to represent anything there. how we explain it. Yeah. So okay. But there are some in the middle options. So one option is what Wheeler calls the action-oriented representations, and some other options are the push me, pull you representations, but they are going to discuss that in a while, so I'm not gonna go into that. But there are some in the middle options, not to just reject representations. Susana and me, we do, but that's okay. But there are some in the middle options to discuss that. And bueno, Gallagher has this quote. I'm not gonna go into it because it's Susana's turn. And what we do keep for representing, that is important. We can keep action-oriented representations or push me, pull you representations. That's okay. I don't think we need them, so that's why we don't use them, but we can keep them. But we do need social representations, which is a different kind of representation of what they are talking about. We need symbols, we need meanings, we need culture, we need language. And those are social representations. And we need that because there are external models and representations that serves as anchors for meanings for our bodies. We mean things around culture, around artificial material culture, etc. And what is important is they don't portray accuracy, truth, or correctness. They just portray meanings, and meanings is gonna become important. So, Susana.
Oh, yes. Okay, great. Well, in this founding book of the enactive approach, 1991 book, Varela, Thompson, and Roche questioned the idea that cognition consists precisely in the representation of an external independent world. The assumption, according to these authors, the assumption behind this idea is that there is behind the representational theory of mind, the cognitivism, is that there is a world out there with pre-given properties that like the world has some properties and the cognitive agent just recovers these properties and acts accordingly, as our colleagues explained. According to Varela, Thompson, and Roche, cognitive systems don't represent the world, they enact the world. And this enacting is, well, I'm going to that in the next slide. So in this enacting, what is relevant for the agent, for the cognitive agent, cannot be separable from their embodiment, cannot be independent of its embodiment, its biology, its actions, in its language, and in history, in different levels. Okay. So, okay, so it is not a project. Okay, but this does not be an idealism. It's not that the agent, like everything is in our mind and nothing exists, and it doesn't go that way. So it's not a projection of an inner world, but a co-determination between knower and known, mind and world. And it's not only that things appear to us, for example, in the colors that they appear because we have like this particular architecture. That is one part, but also that we change our world through our action, and that like we enact, like we move to see in a better way, and we construct the norms that the social norms, for example, or the language. We enact the language because we construct it and we keep constructing, for example, in the case of humans. So in this regard, it is a middle way. It is not like naive realism, neither idealism. So it's a middle way in which properties are neither out there, we just cover them independently of our embodiment, nor in here, like independently of our shared world. So they say what an environment is cannot be separated from what organisms are and what they do, and that is very important. So cognition is neither recovery nor projection, but embodied action, and we're going into that in our whole presentation, what that means. So the departure point from this approach, the enactive approach, is not how a perceiver represents the world in the sense of mental representations, but how she is able to guide its actions in concrete situations that are constantly changing. by ourselves, by others, by processes in nature. Okay, so as Melina said, cognition may involve the manipulation of external representations in language, in symbols, but external symbols. But this does not mean that for our approach, that a cognitive system acts on the basis of internal representation, as it is for a representational theory of mind. So cognitive systems are not determined by external inputs. That is, they are not heteronymous. They give themselves their own norms. I'm going into that in the next slides. But they are determined by self-organization that includes, because our unit of analysis is an organism in a world. So they are not independent of the world. And this mechanism of self-organization involves the interconnection of the body and the environment at multiple levels, as Melina said. So cognitive systems are autonomous. They give themselves their own norms at different levels, but they are not. This does not mean that they are independent from their world. They depend on them in multiple levels, like for eating, for engaging with others, learning. Also as a result of a history of recurrent interactions, we can take that ontogenetically, but also phylogenetically. They become structurally coupled, like with their environment. So what does that mean? And that is very important, that the conduct of each of the things that we interact with and the agent become a function of the conduct of the other. So we have like variables in the environment, are parameters for the organism, and can be the other way around for some processes. So, and in this process, that is very important for this approach, both transform themselves. Like the things that we interact with, the person that we interact with at different levels, like in different levels and grades. As a consequence of their interpenetration, both organism and environment transform themselves. And this is also consistent with niche construction theories in that regard. But what is an autonomous system? I'm going to go deeper into that. It's a system whose organization is defined. It's a kind of system, right? So in autonomous systems, its organization is defined by relations not between static entities, but by processes. So, for example, we can have in a cell, for example, biochemical reactions in metabolic networks or sensory motor process in mobile organisms. These are the processes that constitute and self-organize to constitute the agent. But not only that, well, in this regard, cognitive systems are studied as dynamical systems, not as digital computers, and that is a very important difference. The focus then for enactivism is not on discrete states, but on the processes of transformation in time. And these autonomous systems are not only systems that are constituted by relations between processes, but also they have a recursive organization. So what does that mean? Like this diagram on the right, each constitute processes enables and is enabled by at least some other constituting process, generating a network of enabling relation. And this is called operational closure. For example, in the case of biochemical relations in metabolic networks, right? Okay, so, and also each process depends on the operation of the network as a whole. We call that precariousness. So in that sense, their being is their doing. A process cannot, okay. One of these processes cannot exist if it's not because of the functioning of the whole process, right? So it will disintegrate if you leave it by itself. Like a chemical reaction cannot, or our lungs cannot function if it's not because of our whole functioning, right? So the boundaries between the autonomous system and its world emerge as a result of their organization. So again, their being is their doing. And for example, here, the boundaries come in the cell, it can be distinguished from its environment through a membrane. It is distinguished from this environment through a membrane in the case of a cell. But for example, with us, like it includes prosthetics, for example. It includes my lens because I cannot see without them, right? So that will be part of myself as an autonomous agent. And I'm going to go into the levels, like different kinds of autonomous systems in the next part. Okay. Okay, so by actively and relationally producing and maintaining this dynamic identity, we call it self-individuating, autonomous systems specify a domain of possible interaction with the environment. A cell, for example, maybe a computer is nothing for a bacteria. It doesn't care about the bacteria, it just goes but for example, sucrose is relevant for the bacteria because of its organization, right? So it defines what is relevant, its organization defines what is relevant for the organism. So something is meaningful for an organism if it relates either positively or negatively with its continuation as a viable form of life. For example, the bacterium singles out sucrose as relevant for its identity, and it has biological significance for it. For me, like food, water is significant for myself because that's how I survive, right? So an autonomous system needs to regulate itself and its interaction with the environment adaptively to counteract potential loss of viability. So it's improving the condition of self-production. For example, one example is E. coli opening up a new metabolic pathway when the concentration of sucrose is low and the concentration of lactose is high. Or, for example, an animal moving away from a risky situation. In that regard, an autonomous system always has to make sense of the world so as to remain viable. And this viability is not only biological, it is also sensory motor, right? And it is also social, depending on the organism in question. Okay. And well, also to get what it lacks to keep on going. We always need something from the environment to keep on going. Even the cell, we ourselves need social interaction, we need food, we need, okay, good job. So sense making as viable embodied action is intentionally, okay, so what is intentionality here? And I'm getting to that point. Sense making is intentionality, since sense making understood as embodied action. That is understood broadly to mean the constitution or disclosure of the world, not in idealism terms, but in the terms that I already told you about, related to the organization of the organism. So cognition is always directed, Varela Thompson-Roche said, cognition is always directed towards something that is missing, as I told you. On the one hand, there is always a next step for the system in its perceptually guided action, and on the other, the action of the system are always directed towards situations that have yet to become actual. Unintentional acts, remember imagining thinking, presupposes minimal formal intentionality, but they are also, according to this approach, performances that a living subject does. It's something that one does. So they are conceptualized not as states that have content, but as acts that have directedness. So that's it.